Hello, gentlemen. Today was going to be the day that we finished up our Louis Riel project, and we were going to talk about whether he was a hero or a traitor. And you've done some reading about this really controversial subject, and so I wanted to make this video for you to kind of wrap this up. Unfortunately, we won't get to do the wrap up as we had, of course, planned. Some of you brought the book home, some of you didn't, so this is a voluntary assignment now. And maybe you're just watching this because you're curious, but a lot of you asked me at the beginning of the unit, what do you think? Is Louis Riel a hero or a traitor? And I told you I would tell you. So here's my video on that subject. I think that Louis Riel is both, and that's really why this is so complicated, why it's so controversial, why it's so tough, is because you can make a compelling argument that Louis Riel is a hero, that he is the father of Manitoba, that he is someone that we should admire for things that he did. I think you can also make the argument that Louis Riel is a traitor, that he actively incited armed rebellion, that people died because of his actions, and that he may not have been with it entirely mentally near the end of his life. And so with human beings, we have to put everything on the scales of history, and you just see where does it level out. Is this person more good than they are evil? Do they have more positive achievements than they do negative? And so hero or a traitor with Louis Riel is really tough because I think both are true. And I think you could argue that at one point in his life he was heroic, and at one point in his life he's a villain in the story. And that's controversial. There will be people who disagree with me. Not everyone will agree with what I'm saying, but I'll lay out for you why I think that's true. I think we have to see the Louis Riel story as two different stories. The 1869 River Resistance, where we started the story, the part we read together, where Riel is literally resisting the government of Canada and telling them to back off our land. His actions there are heroic. He's thrust into that position. As Shakespeare told us, sometimes you have greatness thrust upon us. And that's exactly what happened to Riel. He did not want to be a leader. He had to be a leader, and he successfully fights for his people. And of course, rebels don't usually say, we want to come into Canada. And that's what Riel did. He said, we're not fighting back against the government of Canada because we oppose it. We want to become part of Canada on our own terms. So let us join Canada the way that Ontario joined, the way that Quebec joined. They joined voluntarily. Let that happen to our people too. Don't roll your railroad through here and just tell us we're part of Canada. We want to have a say in our ability to join this country. And so Riel successfully negotiates that. He is the father of Manitoba. There is no province of Manitoba. What is today Manitoba would have all been part of the Northwest Territories. There is no province of Manitoba without Louis Riel. He fights for and wins the rights of his people to have their own government, to have their own legislature, to be recognized by John A. Macdonald as a province within Canada and not just something to be taken and turned into something the government wanted. Manitoba becomes a province of its own. It has a Métis name, Manitoba, meaning buffaloes, and John A. Macdonald has to accede to Louis Riel. He has to say, you're right, we were wrong, we're going to give you a province, you're going to get the chance to come into Canada and be an equal province with all the others, and that's because of Louis Riel. It was heroic actions that Riel forced the government. He pushed them back and said, no, you can't just take our land, you have to respect us, you have to recognize us, and the government did, and that was only because Riel stood up. Had he not stood up, there would have been no chance of that happening. Then something happens, and Riel is under incredible pressure because Thomas Scott, who was someone who very much opposed him, dies while in his custody. And while Riel didn't pull the trigger, you could say that Riel is perhaps responsible for the death of Thomas Scott because it was his men who did it. It was his actions which led to the situation that caused Thomas Scott to be dead. And so people in Ontario very much hated Louis Riel because of that and wanted him dead. They wanted him to pay for the death of one of their own. So Riel has a lot of pressure on him, and he knows that there are bounty hunters looking for him. And so he's always having to look over his shoulder and worry. And because of this, he starts to crack. His mental faculties are not all there. His mental health is not all there. And eventually he checks himself into a mental institution, and he's under enormous pressure. John A. Macdonald is essentially giving him money to stay away. These two men who are often seen as enemies, Macdonald is actually supporting Riel while he's in exile in the United States, essentially saying to him, look, stay in the US, just keep your nose out of Canadian business. It'll be easier for everyone that way. But the government, under Macdonald, tries to take land again, this time in Saskatchewan. And so the people in Saskatchewan, Batoche, the place is called, they don't know who to turn to. And then it hits them. This has happened before, and Louis Riel has been successful in pushing back the government and getting a province for his people. And so those people in Saskatchewan, in Batoche, they say, we need Louis Riel. And so they go get him. Riel returns to Canada, and this time he's being influenced by someone named Gabriel Dumont. He may not be of sound mind at this point in his life. And so what was once a resistance, a peaceful resistance in 1869, in 1885 becomes an armed rebellion. And Riel is advocating armed rebellion against the government of Canada. He is calling himself the Pope of the New World. He believes he's had an experience with God and is therefore chosen to lead people. He may not be the same person he was in 1869. So I think we have to see him differently here. 1869 Riel is a freedom fighter. It is a resistance. And in 1885, you have an armed rebellion. Let's take up guns and let's shoot and kill Canadian soldiers, Canadian Mounties. Let's actively fight against rather than let's actively negotiate with the government of Canada. And Riel is arrested, of course, because of that 1885 action, because of what happened in Batoche. And then he gets an absolutely crooked trial. And so here's again where your sympathies can lie again with Riel, because he should not have been hanged. He should have been pardoned. He had terrible defense. He was put on trial in a language that was not his own, which is illegal nowadays, by the way. Couldn't happen today. He's put on trial with an incredibly biased jury. The jury is supposed to be composed of your peers, not of people who are disposed to hate you. Riel has a very, very unfair trial and is hanged and is executed at the end of his life, of course, because he's found to be a traitor. So this is an incredibly complicated, complex thing. I think that Louis Riel was a hero in 1869. I think that he led an armed rebellion against the government of Canada. He broke the laws of the country he voluntarily joined in 1885. You can't do that. But I do think that his sentence should have been commuted. I don't think he needed to die. And I think Johnny MacDonald had lots of opportunity to do that and chose not to, for reasons, many of which probably belie the racism of the time, to be honest. So it's complicated. And this video is complicated, and I wish I had an easy answer for you, but that's why we study the humanities. That's why we look into these topics. They're not easy, and that's why they endure. That's why they're still around. That's why by the time you get to university and by the time you're my age, by the time you have white hair and your beard, people will still be debating, is Louis Riel a hero or a traitor? And if you ask me, he's both. But you're going to get a chance to tell me. What do you think? Is he a hero? Is he a traitor? Ask your parents. Find out around the house. What's the opinion of Louis Riel? Every single February in Manitoba, by the way, they have a Louis Riel Day. In Quebec, because Riel was a French speaker, they very much see Riel still as a hero. And yet there are people in Ontario and in other provinces who still very much see him as a traitor. So this debate will never die. And that's just my 2 cents. What are yours? Thanks.